slices of bread to a sandwich. So sort of that same concept here, that our counter, kind of coming back over to the slide, is our 2 slices of bread. Our number 1 is our ham and good spicy mustard. So I've combined those together to now update the value that's inside of there. Okay, so that's going to draw us out a square exactly as we would expect it. So to spin this back to what we did before, these 2 blocks of code are really the same. So let's answer the question. Which should you use? Well, the answer is, it really just depends on a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, in this case, I like the for loop easier because it's easier for me to keep track of how many times loop is executing.
Exactly.
When I just say for range is 4. But I just, for me, when I'm running a for loop, if I know I want to execute 4 times, I like just saying the range is 4. I know it executes 4 times. I don't have to think about it. With a while loop, I have to sit there going, counter was 0 the first time, then 1, then 2, so it's less than 3. So that, I got it right, it's 4 times. So in this situation, I prefer the for loop, but it is a personal preference.
It is a personal preference, and I'm with you. And the reason that I'm with you, and I'm going to steal a little bit of my thunder here, there's a slide coming up. I'm allowed to steal my own thunder. But coming up, we do have a slide on this, but I'm going to highlight it for right now. The most important line here is this right here. I have to make sure that I update the counter. So this is on me. So if you're not sure of, which should I use, for loops or while loops, again, it does come down to a matter of personal preference. For me, the dividing line is, can I have something else automatically handle the condition for me? So in the case of our for loop, the condition is, as long as we haven't reached 4 times yet, keep doing this.
Okay.
That's the condition. And this little in range will automatically do that for us. But over here, it's my responsibility to go in and update the counter. Again, kind of that lazy developer. If I can let something else do it, I'm going to let something else do it. So this is really nice in scenarios where that condition there will automatically update. So if I can say, as long as we haven't reached the end of the file, keep doing this. Those types of things are perfect for our while loops. Okay, so they both have the same end result, but again, it's going to do kind of whatever it is that you might want. Now, I hinted at this, so now we're going to get in and talk a bit about it. That when it comes to a while loop, remember that you're responsible for handling the condition. Susan actually called that out perfectly. Your responsibility. Because now you have to stop and think, okay, well, how many times am I going to loop? So you might do something like this. That you might think, okay, well, counting starts with 0 in most languages. And somebody mentioned this, and it's worth mentioning now. That's not true across all languages. There are certain languages, like VBA, that doesn't always start with 0. But most languages start counting with 0. Python does, so to avoid any confusion, from here on forward, counting starts with 0. So you might be thinking, oh, okay, right. So counting starts with 0. I'm going to be consistent, so I'm going to declare a counter, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. Cool. Well, I know that I want to draw 4 times, so I'm going to go in and set a while loop, and I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say counter less than equal 4. So if we talk this through, and it's basically the same code that we saw a second ago, if we talk this through, what's going to wind up happening is it's going to run our conditions, and it's going to go 1. Or I'm sorry, 0 rather. That's going to be the first one. So 0, and then it's going to go 1, it's going to go 2, it's going to go 3. Now 3 is less than equal to 4. It's going to go 4, and then it's going to execute that 4th time because 4 is equal to 4.
Okay, yep.
Generally speaking, 4 is equal to 4, So it's going to execute a collective 5 times.
Right, just because I said less than or equal to instead of less than, I end up somebody might look at that and think, oh, it'll execute 4 times, and oh, surprise!
Exactly.
5 times.
All because of that little sideways.
And that's why I like for loops, when I know exactly how many times I want to execute. Because that's the kind of stuff I do by accident, and then I'm executing going, what'd I do wrong?
Yep. Yeah, and this is, one of the things that we talked about yesterday, and both of us have this little hitch in our deliveries, is we both have a propensity to invert our Boolean logic, or make a small little mistake on Boolean logic, like throwing in a less than equals when we just simply meant less than. So, I also have a propensity to say the word propensity, but that's sort of a different conversation. All right, let's kind of bring it back and take another look at another possible scenario that maybe you've decided, you know what, I don't want to count with 0. Or maybe you coded that last one and you said, well, starting with 0 just gave me a mistake, so I'm gonna start with the number 1. So you write code that looks like this, that you say, all right, well, counter equals 1. And you say, while counter less than equal to 4. Well, again, let's talk this through. 1, 2, 3. 3 is less than 4.
Yep.
So when this is incremented up to 4, what's going to wind up happening is that that's now going to test as false, meaning that 4 is now going to not be run, so it's only going to run a collective 3 times.
So now it's actually running 1 less than I expected instead of 1 more than I expected, because this time, just because I initialized to 1 instead of initializing to 0 with my variable.
Exactly.
Again, these subtle things, right?
Yep,
a less
absolutely.
than an equal instead of a less than, initializing your counter to 0 instead of 1, and suddenly you're not execute. These are such common mistakes with while loops. They happen all the time.
They really do. They really do. And if you are going to use this with numbers, the best bit of advice that I could give to you is be consistent. Organization and consistency will set you free. And nowhere is that truer than in code. That if you've going back to that whole lazy developer thing, when it comes to things like formatting my code, I don't think about it. I just do it naturally. The reason that I do it naturally is because I've already made the decisions ahead of time. So I sat down and I said, okay, this is where I'm going to put my tabs. This is where I'm going to, in the case of curly brace languages, put my curly braces. This is how I'm going to format my variables. I've made all of those decisions in advance. So when I sit down, I don't have to think about those things. I think about my code, and that's it. As a real quick side note, for anybody who's listening who's just getting into developing, I would say that the one book, if I could take any new developer and say, if there's one book that you need to read when you decide you're going to take the next step into development, is a little book called Code Complete, and it's written by Steve McConnell. It's a Microsoft Press book, and it's a fantastic book. It does focus a bit more on languages like C++ and C#, but it does a fantastic job of going over things like, choosing good variable names, dealing with casing, where to put your tabs, and it's all of those little things that, when you're taking a programming course, even like this, we're trying to highlight those things, but we only have so much time. That's all that this book is about. So it spends a lot of time talking about those things that really do have a big impact on the readability of your code. It's a fantastic book. In any event, so I've made all of these decisions in advance. So if I'm going to do a loop like this, I'm always going with 0, and I'm always going with less than. That way, I don't have to think about it. I made this decision already. That's what I'm always going with. So rather than kind of approaching this and going, well, I need to loop 5 number of times. Well, should I go 1 and less than 6, 1 and less than equal to 5? Just stick with what you've always done. And in my case, what I would do is I would set it to 0, and I would go less than, and then the number of times that I would want to increment. So if it's going to be 5, I would say set it to 0, and then go less than 5. And that way it's done. Now, all of these are different looping issues. And we've talked about a couple of different ones here, but,
before you do that, can I just ask you quickly, the name of that book again? It was called Code Complete, and the author was Steve
McConnell.
McConnell.
I think I have that name right on his name. Code Complete is the name of the book.
All right, I'm putting that down because there was a couple of comments in the chat window just sort of saying, can you just put that name in there? So it's in the chat window there. So if anybody's interested, we put that in there. So the name of the book is in the chat window.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually put the slides to the side here. And I'm going to comment out my my code. And let's do this. I'm going to say import turtle. There we go. And let's say counter equals 0. I'm going to say 4. Whoops, not 4.
You're doing whiles.
See, my brain just wants to go to for loops.
You knew. It was a fixed number of times. You wanted to use a for loop.
Okay, so in any event, you'll notice that I've got my while counter less than 4. And again, you'll notice I'm sticking with that. That I said 0 less than, that's what I always do. That's exactly what I've done here. So I'm going to say turtle dot forward, and we'll say 100. and I'm going to say turtle dot right, and I'm going to say 90, and I'm going to say counter equals counter.
Can I get you to make a little
1.
change instead of counter equals counter plus 1? We had a lot of questions in the Q&A about different ways of adding 1 to a variable. Somebody was asking if you can use the plus plus that we sometimes use in some languages, and about the plus equal. So would you do me a favor? No, plus plus won't work, but the plus equal syntax does work. So I just want to show that as an alternative way of adding 1 to a variable or adding a value to a variable, because that came up a few times in the chat window. So we just want to show you that's another way of adding 1 to a variable. That plus equal means take this value and add this to it.
Exactly. Yep. So, and one of the things that I would mention, in particular for my for the junior developers that are watching here, people that are new to development, that a lot of times what I'll find is kind of a little bit of pushback on that bit of syntax, because it's certainly not as clear as doing that. And you know what? I'm sort of with you, but I always kind of look at it like a contraction.
Yeah.
That it doesn't necessarily, especially when you're first getting into it, look as clear, but once you start using it, it just becomes second nature. So you might decide, you know what, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so I'm not going to use it for right now. That's totally cool. Again, that's just a matter of personal preference, but you are going to see this quite frequently, and honestly, after a little while, you're just going to, oh, I know what that means. And,
yeah, so it's just nice to see both options.
Absolutely.
It was coming up in the chat window, so I wanted when you got to the demo to show that that is an option. You can either say counter equals counter plus 1 or counter plus equals 1.
Yep.
Your choice.
And in fact, here, let's go ahead and just prove it. So I'm just going to hit start, and then sure enough,
yep, it works.
It works.
There you go.
Okay. Now, let me, I'm going to close this out for right now. There we go. And I'm going to go back to my slide. And let's talk about this. How many lines is this loop going to draw?
Okay, how many lines? Oh, I got to go think again. All right, let's see. We've got counter starts off as 0. So I go into the loop, counter is 0. I've got my, keep track of my fingers here. Well, counter is less than 3, so we draw it. And, okay.
So talk it through.
Okay, so I see what you're doing here. Okay, so counter is 0. I enter the loop. I draw a line.
Yep.
I turn right.
Yep.
I go back to the top of the loop, and my counter is still equal to 0,
okay,
which is still less than 3.
Okay, so keep talking me through
I draw another line, and I turn right.
Yep.
And then I go to the top of the loop, and counter is still 0. So once again, I enter the loop. This loop is going to go on.
Hey, Susan, I'm going to cut you off because it sounds like you're going to go on and on and on forever.
Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Okay, Susan.
Am I done?
Yeah, now you're done. We need a control C.
break.
But yeah, exactly that. And Susan did a perfect job of explaining that with a bit of humor as well. That's exactly what's about to happen. Is my condition here is never going to change because I never updated, I never incremented my counter. And this is one of the biggest pitfalls of using a while loop. Is you have to make sure that condition is going to change. So let's actually kind of go in and do that. You'll notice it is in fact a trick question.
And well done to the Q&A group. We got a lot of people who caught that one. So
awesome.
You got it. Well
Love
done.
It. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to introduce this bug a little more subtly.
Aha! Sneaky. What you've got is because you didn't actually indent the adding 1 to the counter. So just because you forgot to indent it, that code isn't going to execute inside the loop. It'll only execute when you exit the loop. But that means when the loop is executing over and over and over and over again, it never gets out. So it never gets to the line of code that says add 1 to counter.
Exactly. So when I go in and I hit start,
whee! Round and round she goes. When she stops, nobody knows.
We could be here for a little while.
Maybe now would be a good time to show someone what do you do if you're in Visual Studio. Can we go to Visual Studio and show how you get out of this if you code this by accident, because you will.
You absolutely will. Again, if I had a nickel, I'd be able to take my wife out for a very nice dinner. You'll notice right up there in the upper right-hand corner, there's the Stop Debugging button.
Yep.
Just click that.
And you're back to your
you're
code.
Back to normal. Absolutely.
That's your break command.
Yeah, so we'll go back in, we'll hit start again, and rerun it, and now you'll notice that it's just doing it the 4 times. So close. There we go. Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, and that is going to happen. So if you're going to pick up anything about while loops, the biggest thing that I would say is to make sure that your condition changes. So either you do it manually, or it is easier if whatever it is that you're doing, the scenario is going to update automatically. So I remove an item from a list, or as part of my code, just naturally I'm moving to the next line of the file, or whatever it is that that you happen to be doing. So kind of to wrap all that up with our best practices here, use for loops whenever possible. That if you can figure out the number of times that you're going to do it, use that. But again, don't fear the while loop. That there are going to be scenarios where the while loop is the only way, and sometimes, it could actually be a little bit easier to remember. Plus, on top of that, the while loop gives you a little bit more flexibility, because there's nothing that says that every single time that you go through the loop that you have to increment the counter. When you're doing a for loop, basically once you start that for loop, the die is cast, so to speak. That's your counter, and away you go. But here, I can go in and get a little bit more manipulation as needed. So, don't fear it. Sometimes it can be a little bit easier. It's certainly going to be easier when you're looping through kind of an unknown number of times. Don't be afraid of the while loop.
Yeah, there is a time and place to use a while loop. So
exactly.
Yes, you can accidentally end up with an endless loop or execute one too many times, one too few. That's why we test.
Yep.
That's why we have the stop debugging button, or Shift F5 if you're a keyboard person.
That's it.
So, you can get out of it. We'll all make mistakes in our code, but there is a time and a place to use a while loop. And in the end, when it comes to picking loops, a lot of times you can use one or the other.
Yep.
One of these you looked at and said, I get that one. Well, use that one whenever you can. It's simple.
That really is it. I'm sorry, I'm off screen drinking coffee. All right, so your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is create some form of an Etch-a-Sketch program.
I think this one should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Ask the user for a pen color, ask the user for a line length, ask them for an angle, and then away you go from there. So use that turtle to go ahead and draw the line based on those specifications. Now, a couple of things that are worth highlighting is the fact that, remember, when you're doing the input, it's going to be coming as a string. Also remember that you may need to go in and do the math on that, so that 360 divided by whatever number it is.
Yeah, well, in this case, we're actually letting the user specify the angle.
You're doing it line by line.
This is they get the user picks the angle when they're doing it.
Yeah. Sorry about that. But again, you still have to make sure that you convert that to a number. Congratulations.
Yeah.
How to manage loops. And that is a big thing. That's going to be one of the more common things that you're going to be doing inside of your applications, because you're going to have a set of items that, a lot of people have asked kind of what can you do with Python? And the answer is whatever it is that you want. So if you want to create web apps, if you want to create things for automation, etc., you can do that with Python. So, one of the target audiences is IT pros. Well, if I'm trying to update X number of servers,
or all the users in a particular group and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly where something like this is going to come into play, and it's exactly where you're going to have a while loop. So I have my list of servers, and I kind of run through and say, update or reboot or whatever it is that you're going to be doing. Awesome.
I'm just going to mention one little thing because it came up in the chat window. There was a question, are we going to cover for else loops and while else loops? We're not going to bother doing demos of syntax. That's a more unusual situation, but just to state fairly simply, but it is possible, just like when we saw there was an if statement, you could say if this condition is true, do the following, else do something else. You can do that with loops as well. You can say while this is true, else go do this. So it would basically be on exiting the loop, or when the condition for the loop doesn't occur, it would go to the else statement.
Yeah.
That's a fairly unusual syntax. It's something fairly unique to Python, actually. I haven't seen that in a lot of other programming languages. If you are interested, go hit bang, type in for else Python, while else Python, you'll find lots of great example stuff out there. One of the things about coding, we can't show you every single variation of every single command. We want to show you enough that you understand the concepts and you can start solving problems through the code. But you're going to end up discovering little extra options you can do here and there, different features that we haven't shown you just because we can't show it all.
Exactly.
So just to answer that question, we're not going to cover it explicitly. Go explore. So we'll add that to the challenge.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, with that, what do you say we take a little bit of a break?
Sure.
And we'll come back and we'll answer a big question that a couple of people had earlier, is what about looping through a collection of items? What about a list?
Yes, lists are very powerful. So yes, we're going to get into lists, and we're going to actually start storing values in lists, and then mixing that up with our loop capabilities, and then we can make some real magic.
Oh yeah, yeah. Then we can have some fun.
Yeah.
So we'll
just gets more fun the further we get into it.
See? Yeah, this is the fun stuff. All right, we'll see you guys back here in 10. All right, well, welcome back. This is still Introduction to Programming Using Python. Susan Ibach, Christopher Harrison, and we left off doing loops. And when we were doing our loops, based on numbers, which is a great way to learn loops. And you will certainly be doing it based on X numbers. You will absolutely be dealing with numbers. But I would argue more commonly, you're going to have a collection of items that you need to do something to each item. So wouldn't it be nice if maybe I could, I don't know, create some form of a container that would allow me to have multiple items and say, a list?
Don't stop still. You keep trying to jump ahead on my slides here. Let me go.
All right.
All right.
Susan, go.
Awesome. Yeah, so we have been talking about loops, and loops are great for going through doing things multiple times, but they also could be great for looking at multiple values. And so we want to talk a little bit about the idea of lists, because there are times when we talk about our problem solving again, where one of the problems we have to solve is to remember a list of values. And this happens in the real world, day to day. You want to maybe remember the names of everybody who's coming to a party. Because you have to print out their name cards later, or you have to make sure you remember if anybody's a vegetarian or needs kosher food. You need to make sure you have enough glasses and plates for everyone. So a lot of times you need that sort of remember everybody who's coming. You might need to remember all the scores you got in the different courses that you're taking, because you need to calculate your GPA. Maybe you need to remember the directions to get somewhere. You want to, so many of these tools now, there's all these map applications that'll tell you turn by turn directions, but I need to remember, go down this street, turn right, then turn left, or go north on this street for 1 kilometer. I am a Canadian, I did go with kilometers, then turn right, and so on. So there's a lot of situations where we're given what effectively works out to be a list of different values. So it's important when we start problem solving with code that we have an ability to work with those lists and to remember those different lists. So a list is the object in programming that allows you to store multiple values. The directions, the names of your guests, what you need to buy at the grocery store, whatever it is. So to declare a list, the syntax is fairly straightforward.
I love the sample names.
Yeah, you like the names? I'm planning for, this is my guest list for the party.
Wow.
So Christopher, good news, you're invited.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're invited to the party, and I'm hopefully invited to my own party. And I've decided that Bill and Satya can join us as well.
Okay, well, I thought that's awful nice of you.
I thought that would round out the group of four. Maybe this is our little golfing foursome.
There we go.
It'll be you, me, Bill, and Satya going out for a little round of golf. And by the way, I'm a terrible golfer, so my sympathy.
That's okay. My handicap is my swing.
Okay. So I can create a list, and this is literally going to store all those different names inside the variable guess. So the syntax is a little bit different when we declare a list. If you take a look at the code, you can see we have square brackets indicating the start and end of a list, and we have commas separating the different list values. So that's just the syntax you have to use, and you're welcome to store different data types in the list. You can store numbers, or you can store strings, or you can store dates. It's really up to you. Python will allow you to put different data types in a single list, so you could store a name, a number, and a data type, and a date all in one list, but I don't recommend that because it's very hard later when you're trying to go through the values in the list to go, wait, is the first value a date and the next one's a string and the next one's a number? If you're storing, for example, the names of all your guests and the ages of all your guests, right, I would actually recommend you have two lists, one with the names, one with the ages. That's going to be a lot easier for you to work with than having a list of name, age, name, age, name, age, name, age.
Yeah, you don't want to have to remember where you are in each one of those.
And even if it's, so anything where you want to store different values, you're probably better off having lists for each value than mixing it. Even if it's name and the city where they live. They're all strings. I could theoretically store that all in one big long list. You know, Susan, Ottawa, Christopher, Seattle, Bill, Seattle, Satya, Seattle. Apparently everybody's in Seattle.
Move to Seattle.
Yeah. No, thank you. But it would be better to have a name of guests list and a home of guest list. And I know that the first value in the names goes with the first value in the list of cities. And the second value in names goes with the second value in cities. And I know the third value in names goes with the third value in cities. So that's just in generally speaking, when we're working with lists and code, we generally store one piece of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. We store all names in one list, all cities in one list, all favorite sports in another list.
Sure. And again, there's always multiple ways to solve that. So you can, kind of get a bit more complex and maybe creating more complex data types and things like that. So there's a lot of ways that you can handle that. But keeping things simple, especially for where we are, try to keep one data type inside of a list.
And you said, not even one data type, one piece of information.
Yeah.
You have multiple names, but they're all names of the people coming.
Yeah.
Said, if you're storing their cities, you're going to make a separate list for that. So that's just a tip that'll make your life easier when you start working more with lists. So we go back to the slides for a second here. In terms of syntax, sometimes we were talking last chapter about one of the things we often do with loops is things like reading from files or reading from databases. So what we might do is initially we create an empty list, and then we end up with a loop that goes and reads values from a file, which, hey, guess what modules we're doing this afternoon? We're going to be reading from a file. So you're actually going to start putting everything together here, and you'll be able to write loops that read from files, put the values in a list. We're going to get to that by the end of the day. So to create an empty list, the syntax is simply give your list a name, and then you just specify the square brackets with nothing in them, and that literally is an empty list. Once you have created a list and you've given it values, it's important to know, how do I ask for a specific value? Because having a list of values is great, but if my program is going to print out a guest list for me, then I'm probably going to need a loop that says, go get the first value, print it, go get the second value, print it, or take the first value, write it to a file, take the second value, write it to a file so I can send it to someone else. So the way we do that is we have to specify where in the list of values located. And remember, how do we count in programming?
Counting starts with 0.
Counting starts with 0. That's right. So, Christopher, you're guest 0.
I'm 0.
You are 0.
Wow.
Hey, guess what? I'm number 1.
Okay.
Bill's number 2, and Satya's number 3. So
this doesn't resemble the org chart in any way, shape, or form, by the way.
Not at all. Absolutely not. But in terms of their positions, if you look at the slide, you can see it said the reference, if I reference the value in index position 0 or in position 0, that's going to be Christopher. If I specified guest 1, that would be Susan. Guest 2 would be Bill. Guest 3 would be Satya. So you can, at any time you need to, it's possible to say, give me that specific value. In this case, if I say, give me score 3, that's going to return what value, Christopher?
0, 1, 2.
Yeah, 0, 1, 2.
62.
3. So therefore.
49.
Yes.
Okay.
It will return
Sorry.
49.
Yep,
Yeah.
you're right.
I was waiting for you to catch up there.
0.
Okay. We'll practice counting later.
I need to take off my shoes.
We didn't get past 5, but so anyway, so because it's score number 3, because we start counting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, the value in the list that's in position 3 is in fact the number 49, even though that's the 4th value in the list. Remember, counting from 0. One of those little things we have to keep remembering. So sure enough, yes, this would print out Christopher and 49 on the screen. We call the position, in terms of, in geek speak, when we talk about a position of an item in a list, we refer to that as the index. So you'll hear us say, what's the index of that item? What's the position index? So that's just a term we use when we're referring to a location of an item inside a list, or sometimes called an array. One of the neat things I like about Python is it actually allows you to count backwards. This is kind of neat. So if you want the last value in the list, that's position -1. The second to last value in the list is -2. Third to last is -3. And in this case, because there's 4 entries, Christopher would be -4.
I always assumed to be the smallest number.
Don't take it personally. So you can literally say print the value in the list that's in position -1. And that is actually something where there are times where you might want the last value.
Yep.
So it's nice to just be able to say, hey, get me the value in position -1. Rather than, there are other ways to do this. You can ask for